What if I told you that abstinence doesn't make you pure, it just makes your brain hungrier? It's true. The mind, that arrogant little kingdom of thought and reason, withers under deprivation. When starved of touch, it starts whispering, first softly, then desperately, until even the shadows look seductive. History loves to dress chastity in silk robes and halos, but behind every saintly vow and monastic cell lies the quiet madness of isolation and the chemical rebellion of the human brain, because sex, for all its moral baggage, is not merely pleasure, it's architecture. It builds our neurochemistry, our identity, our empathy. Remove it, and you don't just lose lust, you lose balance. So tonight, we'll explore what happens when that most ancient appetite is silenced, from the rewiring of dopamine circuits to the eerie emotional numbness that follows years without intimacy. This is the dark science of starvation, both physical and psychological. By the end of this video, you might need therapy, or at least a drink. Let's get right into it. Number 10. The brain that forgot how to touch. Imagine your skin, an empire of nerves, exiled from affection. No hands, no lips, no warmth, just cold air and routine. At first, you cope. The body adjusts, but the brain begins to grieve. Touch is not decoration, it's data. Every caress, every accidental brush of fingers floods the brain with oxytocin and dopamine, the biochemistry of belonging. Strip that away, and you create a drought in the emotional circuitry. Over time, the prefrontal cortex, the seat of rational control, grows louder, compensating for the silence of the limbic system. You become disciplined, focused, and terrifyingly detached. In studies of long-term celibacy and touch deprivation, researchers found patterns that mimic mild depression, anxiety, even derealization. That eerie sense that life has turned two-dimensional. The body still functions, but the mind feels like an empty theater, echoing with scenes it can no longer perform. Ironically, this is where many monks and ascetics report transcendence. But in neurological terms, that transcendence looks a lot like sensory deprivation, hallucination, a beautiful madness the brain invents to fill the void. When deprived of touch, the mind does what all starving creatures do. It feeds on itself. In the end, the absence of touch doesn't make us divine. It just makes us ghosts that still breathe. Number 9. Dopamine's funeral. Sex isn't just a pastime, it's a neurological fireworks show. Dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, all firing in exquisite synchrony to remind you that you're a live, wanted animal. Now imagine canceling that show for years. Without sexual stimulation, the brain's reward pathways begin to atrophy, like roads no longer traveled. Dopamine receptors, those tiny chemical doorways to joy, become less sensitive. The result? A strange kind of emotional color blindness. Food tastes duller. Music loses edge. Even ambition feels muted. It's not punishment exactly. It's entropy. And here's the cruel twist. The more you suppress desire, the stronger it becomes in the background, not as pleasure, but as obsession. Your dreams turn erotic, your focus derails, your thoughts loop back to forbidden memories. The mind rebels, whispering temptation through cracks in the dam you built. In monks, this manifests as the demon of midday, sudden bouts of lust and despair during prayer. In modern abstainers, it looks like addiction substitution, binge eating, compulsive scrolling, aggression. The moralists call it purification. Neuroscience calls it withdrawal, because dopamine doesn't negotiate. It only asks one question: when will you feed me again? Number 8. The erosion of desire. Desire is not a switch you can simply turn off. It's more like a river. Dam it long enough, and it either floods or dries the land entirely. When sex disappears from your life for years, the brain must make a choice: endure the thirst or forget it ever existed. Some people report that, over time, they simply stop wanting. Not just sex, but connection, play, risk, color. The erotic fades, and with it, the pulse of curiosity itself. Neuroscientists call this hyposexual adaptation. Poets might call it dying in slow motion. As testosterone levels decline from disuse, the amygdala, that primal alarm bell of emotion, quiets down. On paper, that sounds like peace. In reality, it's emotional frostbite. You stop reacting not because you're enlightened, but because nothing warms you anymore. Centuries ago, priests and philosophers praised this numbness as purity. In truth, it was the brain running on power-saving mode. Some monks even described the sensation of holy emptiness, which, translated from neurology, means a frontal cortex hijacked by suppression. Irony of ironies. The more you try to kill desire, the more your body becomes a shrine to it. Every heartbeat a relic, every breath a confession. Eventually, the river doesn't just stop flowing. It forgets it was ever water. Number 7. The mind's erotic mirage. Abstinence, over time, doesn't extinguish desire. It distills it. What remains isn't lust, it's hallucination. When deprived of sexual stimulation, the brain begins to manufacture it. Vivid, erotic dreams, sudden physical sensations. The mind projects fantasy onto strangers, furniture, even religious icons, anything that will host the starving instinct. This phenomenon, seen in studies of long-term celibates and isolated prisoners, is called libidinal projection. It's not just daydreaming, it's survival. The temporal lobes and limbic structures, once fed by regular sensory reward, begin to overfire, like static electricity searching for a conductor. Some abstinent individuals even report phantom orgasms, neurological echoes of pleasure that never happened. The body remembers what the body no longer does. History offers delicious examples. St. Teresa of Avila described divine ecstasy so intense it set her on fire with the love of God. Bernini immortalized it in marble, a saint pierced by an angel, moaning in what art historians politely call religious transport. But strip away the theology, and it's neurobiology in rebellion. The body doesn't care what you worship, it just wants to feel alive. And when it can't have reality, it builds its own theater of sin inside your skull. Number 6. When loneliness becomes theology. You've probably heard the phrase celibate by choice, but for the brain, there is no such thing as choice, only chemistry. When you go years without sexual contact, your brain begins to repurpose that loneliness. It has to. The human mind can't sit still in emptiness. It will either rot there or build a temple. That's why so many who swear off desire become obsessed with ideology, religion, philosophy, revolution, work. They sublimate lust into purpose. The libido doesn't die, it changes costume. Neuroscientists have scanned monks mid-prayer and found their brains glowing like lovers mid-orgasm. The same dopamine surge, the same bliss, the same illusion of union. The only difference? One prays to God, the other moans his name. That's the sacred trick of abstinence. It lets the ego believe it's holy, while the body secretly rewires itself to survive. But make no mistake, this is theology as therapy. The faithful aren't untouched, they're transformed addicts, learning to sip ecstasy through the straw of salvation. So when you see saints with glassy eyes and trembling hands, know this: they are not immune to desire. They are drowning in it and calling it prayer. In the absence of a lover, the brain will make one, even if that lover's name is God. Number 5. The war between brain and body. The body wants. The brain judges. And when sex is removed for years, the two turn into enemies sharing the same house. Physically, testosterone, in men and women alike, starts to fall. Cortisol, the stress hormone, quietly rises. You may not notice it at first. You just feel more tired, more restless. You wake up at 3 a.m. thinking about old lovers you swore you'd forgotten. You start craving sugar, violence, validation, anything that mimics the reward your brain no longer gets. The hypothalamus, starved of the chemical rhythm of intimacy, sends out distress calls. It's the biological equivalent of drunk texting your ex. But your rational brain, the one obsessed with purity, control, or pride, blocks the message. It insists you're fine, that you're above all that. And so begins the quiet civil war between your flesh and your philosophy. History is littered with the casualties: priests caught in scandals, leaders collapsing under repression, entire societies preaching chastity while building empires on exploitation. Because the libido never disappears, it simply migrates. When sex is forbidden, it doesn't vanish. It metastasizes into ambition, obsession, cruelty. In the end, the most dangerous people are not the lustful, but the repressed. Number 4. Dreams of flesh and smoke. When the body stops touching, the mind starts dreaming. After years without sex, the brain turns sleep into theater. The scripts are primal, lovers with no faces, sensations with no names. Scientists call them nocturnal emissions or REM compensation. Poets would call them hauntings. You see, the brain doesn't believe in abstinence. It stores desire like contraband, smuggling it into your dreams under the cover of darkness. In these subconscious carnivals, dopamine and oxytocin surge as if real, your neurons lighting up in desperate imitation of life. For a few flickering moments, the brain gets to remember warmth. Then morning comes and the guilt follows. Throughout history, mystics interpreted these dreams as temptation, the devil whispering through silk. But the devil was never real. It was just the nervous system missing home. The irony? Those who suppress their sexuality the hardest often dream the loudest. In monks, nuns, and zealots, erotic dreams are common, even overwhelming. The body still prays, just not to the same God. Because when the conscious mind locks the doors, the subconscious picks the lock, and in that twilight between sleep and shame, every saint becomes a sinner again. Number 3. The hollow crown of control. Control feels powerful until you realize it's a cage. After years of sexual deprivation, many report a strange euphoria. Clarity, self-discipline, freedom from chaos. It's seductive, like a tyrant discovering peace in his own dictatorship. But beneath that serenity lies something more sinister: emotional anesthesia. Without the hormonal cycles of desire and release, the brain's empathy circuits grow dull. Studies have linked long-term celibacy to lower oxytocin levels, the same hormone responsible for trust, bonding, and compassion. You don't just lose lust, you lose softness. The longer you maintain perfect control, the harder it becomes to connect. Conversation feels mechanical. Faces lose warmth. The world becomes a series of moral puzzles instead of living, breathing people. This is how zealots are born, not out of cruelty, but absence. They mistake their emotional frost for moral superiority, because nothing feels safer than control, until you realize control is just loneliness in uniform. In the empire of the abstinent mind, the crown may be clean, but the heart beneath it is starving. Number 2. Madness in the mirror. Every deprivation eventually demands payment, and the brain collects with interest. After years without sexual intimacy, something eerie begins to happen. The self fractures. Deprived of physical affirmation, you start seeing yourself not as a person, but as a concept, an image to be managed, judged, perfected, punished. Narcissism and self-loathing take turns holding the mirror. Clinical psychologists have seen this before in patients practicing extreme abstinence, in prisoners, in long-term isolation subjects. The brain, desperate for social and sexual validation, turns inward. It begins performing for itself. Some start obsessing over their reflection, their virtue, their status, their purity. Others spiral into disgust, unable to look themselves in the eye. It's the same madness that once gripped kings and martyrs, the belief that suffering is proof of worth, that the absence of pleasure makes you holy. But holiness, when dissected, is often just untreated neurosis wearing a halo. In the Renaissance, they called it melancholia. Today, we might call it burnout, incel rage, or the influencer's disease. Different costumes, same hunger. When the world stops touching you, you either worship yourself or destroy yourself, often both. Because when the body's music goes silent, the ego starts to sing, and it never knows when to stop. Number 1. The starved soul. So what happens, really, when you go years without sex? The science is simple, the poetry unbearable. Your brain rewires, your hormones flatten, dopamine dims, oxytocin withers, serotonin limps along like a drunk messenger. You function, yes, you work, eat, breathe. But the spark fades. The laughter feels rehearsed. The world, once vibrant, becomes grayscale. Yet, and here's the exquisite cruelty, some learn to love the numbness. It's clean, predictable, pain-free, a kind of death you can live with. That's the final trick of abstinence. Doesn't just deny pleasure, it redefines it. The quiet starts to sound like peace. The emptiness starts to feel like control. You mistake the absence of need for enlightenment, but look closer. Underneath that stillness, the human animal still waits, patient, furious, sacred. Because sex, in the end, is not sin or shame or scandal. It's how the brain remembers it's alive. If history teaches us anything, it's this. Power always feeds on denial. And when you starve the body, the soul becomes its next meal. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.